Our lives are shaped by the choices we make. The tiniest adjustments to a schedule, how we phrase our sentences, and how we conduct our actions all shape how our immediate and distant future will play out. Many of these fundamental decisions are often made unconsciously, often shaped by our environments or how we were raised. However, some choices make us pause and think for a moment to weigh the positive and negative outcomes of how we may conduct ourselves. The concept of choice and its positive and negative impacts can spark a lot of debate. Is the future outcome of our choices even a future many of us would want? The consequences of our actions might be something only some people consider day to day. This is not because of any personal moral failings, but because many of us do not see the consequences of our actions until days, months, or even years later. This delay in reaction gives us a level of deniability regarding how our actions may affect the broader picture. Think of possible examples in your own life. Do the people you associate with influence your hobbies and interests? Does your overall educational experience change depending on which courses you take and when? Do the habits you form early in life ultimately change who you'll be and who you'll end up with as you grow old? Does making a TikTok account where you play up the cringe to the max impact how people in your own personal life see and talk to you and gives you a crippling sense of social anxiety to the point where you have to go back to therapy? There's a lot to consider here. Would we do things differently if we could know in real time how our words changed our environments and relationships around us? Or would we see it as many see the average statistic, a fleeting moment that we only take note of and never truly apply to our lives? What if I told you there are ways to see and analyze these actions and reactions? To see the direct outcome of our choices almost immediately after making them? A narrative bubble where everything we do changes the outcome of the story. Yes, I'm talking about video games. After all these years, leaping at every opportunity to overanalyze gaming, you thought this wouldn't be about that? Specifically, I want to talk about narrative-driven games in which the choices of the characters we play directly impact the plot. I have played and loved some of these games since high school, and something I've noticed over the years is that the most rewarding narratives often come from the choices that prioritize collective good over individual interests. I wish to explore how this storytelling format can influence players to try and be better people. And yes, I'm recording this after midnight because consequences of your own actions and waiting till the last minute to film this means you're going to be recording till 3 a.m. Yay. I want to explore how some of these video games can influence players to try and be better people in their everyday lives. Before we analyze these games, I want to cover some core concepts for anyone who may be unaware or is new here or isn't a gamer. First, what exactly are narrative-driven games? Since the release of Pong in 1970, video games have evolved from pixels on a screen with bare-bone mechanics to a multifaceted storytelling medium. Tales of love, loss, hope, and revenge are made all the more compelling due to the player's direct control of the main character. The controller blurs the line between main character and viewer in ways that a TV show or movie can't. Some games like The Last of Us, Portal, Tomb Raider, or Uncharted are pretty straightforward. We have no say in the main character's motivations and personality, and there's nothing the player can do that would change the outcome of the story. We are simply a vessel in seeing the unavoidable. Other games, such as Life is Strange, Until Dawn, and Tales from the Borderlands, implement a range of choices for the player regarding actions, dialogue, or setting. Games like these often give the player foreboding or encouraging notifications depending on how you play. Some even show the statistics behind your choices at the end of each level, showing you if your chosen path was the popular one or if you were an outlier. For all the non-gamers out there, they're essentially choose-your-own-adventure books, but with the magic of the cinema! This method of gameplay stands out from traditional media narratives as it forces the player to directly put themselves in the shoes of the main character, causing us to empathize with them in ways that media just hasn't been able to before. And to be fair, the games I wish to discuss don't directly reward you or punish you for choosing any one particular path. The fact that there are so many endings to these games is kind of a selling point, and having an acceptable way to play a choose-your-own-adventure game defeats the purpose. However, the majority of the satisfying and happier endings come from making the most morally good choices. So, what exactly do I mean by morally good choices? Well, to understand that, we need to take a moment to talk about why. Hold on. What? Capitalism bad. Specifically, I wish to analyze how the morally good choices I mentioned ultimately challenge neoliberal ideas. But to do that, I need to explain what I mean by neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is an economic philosophy that originated in Europe in the 1930s and gained prominence in the latter half of the 1900s. It prioritizes free market capitalism and emphasizes limited government intervention and regulation. A core principle of neoliberalism is individual liberty and the idea that people should be able to pursue their own economic goals with no government interference. Now, this sounds good at a surface level until you realize that what people mean by no government intervention are often things that would benefit society and minimize corruption. This includes social welfare programs, socialized healthcare, public housing, taxation for the ultra-wealthy, price ceilings on essential goods, and minimum wage laws. Neoliberalism elevates the role of individual gain over community good. If it's not your life or it doesn't personally affect you, then it's essentially not your problem. Under this system, the government is only there to protect the wealthy and their property. Law enforcement protects this property and maintains social order, often foregoing the punishment of inhumane actions. And it's this exact obsession with seeking one's personal interests over the collective good that I want to focus on, as it relates to the core gameplay mechanics of narrative-driven games. In almost every narrative-driven game you play where your choices impact the plot, your relationships with other characters and how you treat them play an essential role in which ending you will get. I'll be talking about these games in the order of how well I think they serve as a critique to neoliberalism. Alright, history lesson over. Let's jump right into it. Oh no, in the time it took me to write this script, the zombie apocalypse started. Most of humanity is dead and now I am running from bloodthirsty monsters with only my own thoughts. I will never socialize with anyone again. This is a tragedy. However will I manage? The Walking Dead follows a man with a sketchy history who is tasked with protecting a young girl while they traverse what's left of humanity after the apocalypse. The story opens with Lee Everett in the back of a cop car being escorted to prison after murdering the man his wife was having an affair with. As the police cruiser heads down the highway, the zombie apocalypse starts, and Lee gets the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. As he runs from the herd of walkers, he runs into Clementine. Already knowing deep down that Clementine's parents are probably not alive, Lee takes this girl into his care, and along the way, you get to see Lee redeem himself in multiple ways. Through protecting Clementine and fostering trust with your fellow survivors, Lee can right the wrongs of his past. This honesty and admission of guilt helps him later on in the game when a character tries to use Lee's past against him. And while you can play this game either way and Lee still dies in the end, not helping the group and saving as many as you can means you have to do the final levels of the game entirely on your own, which can be far more challenging. Helping the community instead of only thinking of yourself comes back to help you when things get rough. Through caring for the community and showing remorse for your actions, Lee has a chance at redemption, a chance he may not have gotten through the American prison system, which under capitalism profits from mass incarceration. And I'm not going to do a full deep dive into Season 4, but I want to briefly mention the role of the youth in challenging individualist ideas. In the final installment of Telltale's The Walking Dead series, you now play as a grown-up Clementine, who has taken a similar role as Lee in protecting a young child and teaching him to survive. The end of the game shows Clementine and AJ finding a home in an old boarding school, run by kids who have been ditched by their teachers. I think there's a hopeful symbolism behind these kids' actions. They all make a place for Clementine in the end despite her losing a limb. In a world infested with creatures you need to outrun, a person with an amputated limb would be seen as a liability, and that has been the case with the adults in other seasons. If you can't benefit the system, it is useless to protect you. Out of all of the groups Clementine has run into, I think it's really sweet that it's the youth who reject this mentality, prioritizing community care over maintaining a system that doesn't support the disabled. To me, it's a subtle nod to how we see more and more young people fight back against the oppressive structures we have in place today. Oh, Jesus Christ. Another famous game by Telltale is The Wolf Among Us, where you play as Bigby Wolf, the big bad wolf from fairy tale lore. who, like other fantasy characters or fables, is exiled to the desolate barren wasteland of New York City. Bigby is tasked with finding the killer who has recently been targeting other fables, and along the way you can either garner the trust or fear of those in Fabletown, depending on your actions. I think this game is actually a better example of narratives that challenge conventional systems more so than The Walking Dead, and that's mainly for the reason that Bigby is the town sheriff. From the get-go, we get the impression that Bigby isn't really well liked or even trusted. He's the bad guy in several famous fairy tales, and that reputation has followed him into this new world. But that reputation gives players the chance to either play as a good cop or bad cop. As the player, you can either ensure the people of Fabletown only fear you more, or you can set Bigby down the path of redemption, enlisting the help of other fables. And when solving a case, you need all the information and help you can get, and in the case of Bigby, acting like a person before a cop is what gets you this help. There are several pivotal moments in the game where Bigby has a lead in the case of who's been murdering other fables. You, as the player, are often faced with choices where characters get in the way of your investigation. Although you sometimes lose leads and certain suspects get away, protecting the physical safety of those around you or trying to de-escalate situations as much as possible often garners the trust of the other fables. And forming these habits of thinking about the fables before seeking revenge or a twisted sense of justice proves valuable in the end of the game when you have to convince the fables to convict the actual killer, which I think is an interesting point when we're talking about these games' abilities to critique neoliberalism. Throughout the entirety of the game, we see these classic fairy tale characters all suffering in their own ways under a capitalist system. There's Toad and the complexities of animal fables being required to disguise themselves as humans with the expensive and largely unaffordable spells. Many of these fables turn to black market magic because of the prices. Beauty and Beast turn to shady and even illegal jobs as the cost of living becomes too high, with no social means of protection to catch them as they fall. There's even some mention of characters turning to prostitution just to make ends meet. All of these characters are so wrapped up in this system that they have nowhere else to go but the crooked man, the person behind the murders and the leader of a crime ring. He even reminds them of how he helped them during his own trial, a twisted attempt to get the people on his side. Now, the best way to go about this situation and gain the support of everyone in convicting this killer is to actually admit and apologize for the system failing them. That the way things were set up brought the wrath of the justice system on the people suffering and not the person abusing them. Acting in the community's interests over thinking about doing things by the book gains back some of the trust Bigby has lost over the years. And while this is another game where no matter how you play, you pretty much get the same ending, playing with everyone's interests at heart is what sets Bigby down the path of redemption, who is now determined to change the lives of a people failed by a corrupt system. Because a significant criticism of Telltale's games is that their endings are too similar. No matter how you play The Walking Dead, every player has seen the infamous scene where Lee is about to become a walker and says his goodbyes to Clementine. No matter how you play the final season, the same happens with Clementine and AJ, and there are only slight variations to the final cutscene depending on who you save and who you choose as your romantic partner, if you choose any. The Wolf Among Us is very similar. Now, while these games are still enjoyable, this robs some of the excitement out of the experience once you realize you get the same ending no matter how you play. And that brings us to Detroit Become Human, and the reason I'm most excited to talk about this game is that it is arguably one of the best current examples of what narrative-driven gameplay can be. In this game, you take on the roles of three characters, Connor, Kara, and Marcus, three of the many human-like androids built to serve humans. And you want to take a wild guess as to where Detroit Become Human is set? That's right, Austin, Texas. The story takes place in Detroit in the year 2038. As you play as these three main characters, you get to participate in the android revolution from different, sometimes opposing sides. With Marcus, you can play as the revolution's leader and can take a pacifist or violent approach. As the player, you can influence the opinions that the public and your comrades have of you. The second character you play as is Connor, the android sent by CyberLife. He is tasked with working for the police and containing the deviant androids that are posing a threat to national security and threatening the capital interests of those who have incorporated the android slaves into their daily lives and businesses. 'cause nothing's worse than those pesky slaves thinking that they deserve equal rights or something, those gosh darn things. The final character you play as is Kara, an android who saves the daughter of her owner from his abuse, either by killing him or running away. You follow her journey as she and this young girl Alice try to find a better life where androids can be free, and that place is the mythical land of Canada where bigotry doesn't exist and everything's perfect, absolutely nothing to see or critique here. This game draws influence from various civil rights movements in history, mainly the American Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, and I'm not gonna lie, this made me uncomfortable at first, and I've seen a lot of people bringing this up when critiquing this game. It seems somewhat insensitive to take imagery and language from a real civil rights movement and use it regarding a fictional race. However, in my research, I came across an article that shifted my thoughts somewhat on the topic. In Acts of Becoming, an examination of the historical symbolism and embodied empathy in Detroit Become Human, Adam Tompkins argues that framing the struggle for equal rights in the future with a group of beings that do not yet exist has the potential to disarm game players of latent biases that may otherwise color their view of contemporary racial issues. Okay, yeah, sure, I can see that. People are more receptive to information when they don't think they're being preached to. With a game like Detroit Become Human, this separation is vital because of the ways it critiques various elements of neoliberalism. And yes, I say elements of neoliberalism because I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Detroit Become Human is the ultimate pinnacle of socialist storytelling. No game is perfect. So I'm going to go over some of the plot points of the version of Detroit that I played with some slight glimpses into the other options that could have happened. This game has around 85 different possible endings. I frankly don't have the time to go over all of them. But with a little help from my Twitch chat and looking up the answers online, I think I got what is considered the best possible ending. From the get-go, we understand that humans see androids as property. The opening scene of the game is Connor, the android sent by CyberLife, arriving at an active crime, with a family's android suddenly snapping and turning violent, killing one and taking a child hostage. The language used towards Connor is immediately hostile or indifferent. Trying to uncover what motivated the android to snap only results in frustrated police responses. They don't care about what makes an android do something, they simply care about taking out this piece of faulty machinery. One interesting moment in this level that stood out to me, and seems to be a running theme in the game, is that cops and massive corporations are not the good guys. The company of CyberLife who created the androids are trying to squash the deviant movement just as much as the police, as their main product suddenly gaining sentience and demanding equality doesn't exactly bode well for company profits. The police forces in this game operate much like they do now in our own world. They are there to protect the property of those who have wealth. The signifier of wealth is often the act of owning an android. We see this as the law enforcement present only seems to escalate the situation, drawing the android closer to jumping with the child he's taken hostage. But Connor does discover the android's motivations, and they're pretty understandable. You discover that this android Daniel has grown to see and love his owners like family, only to discover that they were planning to replace him. He realizes that no matter how much he loves and respects them, they will ultimately see him not as a person, but as a machine. And even if Connor does manage to talk Daniel down from the ledge, even if you promise him safety, the cops don't arrest him, they just outright murder him, even though he is no longer an active threat. Because, from most of humanity's perspective, why wouldn't you? You are no longer beneficial to the system set in place, so why should people care about your safety? We are then introduced to Marcus as he buys new paints for his owner Carl. As Marcus walks through a downtown shopping area, we see the general public's opinion on androids. They have been completely integrated into everyday life, with clear markers setting them apart from humans, like armbands and separate sections of public transportation. When anti-android protesters are attacking Marcus, the cops' main concern isn't the fact that an angry mob is ganging up on someone, it's that he might have to fine them for property damage if Marcus is hurt. A brief but clear reminder that under this particular system, the police are not there to assess the humanity of a given situation. Their sole purpose is to protect property, and the needs of those who may be oppressed don't even come into consideration. The one human in Marcus's life who does see him as a person is ironically his owner, Carl. What immediately stood out to me about Carl is the fact that the first person we ever see to treat an android like a person is an artist. The fact that Carl pushes Marcus to be his own individual symbolizes the role of artists in any given society. Art is a reflection and critique of the world around us. It has historically been used to challenge the status quo, and often plays a role in liberation movements. Kara is an interesting character. Although your decisions while playing as her play a significant role in her and Alice's safety, their fates also heavily rely on the actions of Marcus and Connor. There's even one scene where Kara is running away from the police, and you as the player switch control between Kara and Connor, giving you the choice to either let the runaways go or capture them. She's not an active part in the revolution, she's more of a bystander, but that doesn't mean her role is any less critical. Kara and Alice's journey reflects the average person within an oppressed group, and how the actions of those representing that group either harm or help their liberation. It's unfair in many ways, but the way revolution leaders act reflect how the public views every person within that marginalized group. Over the course of the game, Marcus has to prioritize the needs of the collective movement over his own personal need for revenge against the humans who hurt him. For every step he takes, he must think about how his actions reflect the cause, and doing so results in more androids surviving. The game also touches on the morality of illegal actions committed by oppressed groups. There are several scenes where Kara has to break the law to survive. You can choose not to steal the food and clean clothes while on the run, but that ultimately poses a greater risk to Alice's safety. The only way that Kara and Alice can safely get to the border is by stealing bus tickets from an innocent family with a young child, which, makes you feel like a bit of an asshole, but ultimately the human family isn't the one being oppressed. They will have every opportunity to cross the border. Kara does not. Marcus and the people of Jericho begin liberating the androids by smashing a storefront, freeing the androids inside who are being sold like property, and vandalizing a financial district. They get their message out into the world by breaking into a broadcasting tower, detaining those inside, and hacking a public broadcast. In the final battle, the androids must build an illegal barricade outside the android concentration camp. Decommission centers. The game makes that very clear. Connor finds his own freedom and a place within the liberation movement by directly defying police and corporate orders, and thinking about things humanely over only thinking about taking down deviants. In all of these examples, illegal tactics are being used to further a cause for good. And yeah, sure. You can argue that breaking the law is wrong, but what if those laws are stupid? What then? What exactly am I supposed to do? How can you sit here and condemn breaking the law in a system where immorality and dehumanization are the law, when the system in place only protects the property rights of those who have money and not marginalized groups? Similar to The Wolf Among Us, resolving the conflict of Detroit Become Human means directly opposing the system that brings the justice system down on the abused, and not the abusers. So, a bit of a confession, this is actually the game I wanted to talk about the most, but in the interest of fairness I chose to cover a few more. I think it's safe to say that I have just engaged in a bit of overanalyzing, reaching, yapping, so to speak, but I think these concepts are important to acknowledge within this context. A major thing that inspired this video was the fact that I grew up playing a lot of these video games, and they have personally changed how I view my own actions. I have had moments in my own life where I'm about to do something and my brain automatically goes to my memories of these video games and the frustration I felt when I said something mean or when my actions had devastating consequences. It makes me want to find the best possible outcome for my own life, and I don't think this is a thought process I would have developed if I didn't have this form of media in my life. It sounds corny as hell, but I genuinely believe video games have made me a better person. And I don't think this is just me. To be 100% clear, I don't think it's a major factor, but still, I do think that narrative-driven games like this are partially to blame for the major political divide between generations that we're seeing now. I personally believe that many people my age are so politically motivated and driven to social justice because they grew up with media like this. They don't just consume stories, they control them. And what we consume influences how we act. A famous quote by Margaret Thatcher, the champion of neoliberalism and professional dead person, is that there is no alternative. Well, actually, there is always an alternative. You just have to choose the right dialogue option, babes. And that is exactly my point. Oppressive systems thrive off the notion that there is no alternative. There is no other right way to do things. This is the lesser of the evils, so we might as well just suck it up and learn to live with it. But clearly, that's not true. Just looking at the past 80 years alone, we have made massive social and political changes. From the civil rights movement, to Stonewall, to the Black Lives Matter movement. And we're seeing it now with this mass support of the Palestinian liberation movement. People are seeking out alternatives because at a certain point, sucking it up and learning to live with the lesser of the evils only goes so far. More and more we are starting to realize as a society that we can change the outcome of the future. Many who play narrative-driven games have kinda known this for years now. So thank you for watching, and I am sorry because now the US government might try to ban these video games. I mean, shit, they're already trying to ban TikTok. I wouldn't put it past them.